Hey Grace Kids, it's good to get you another lesson here for today, and we're going to be talking about Jacob and Rachel. And this is a little bit of a love story here, so guys, stay cute in, okay? It's going to be okay. You'll be able to get through it. It's cool to be able to see God's promises throughout all this, but we're going to be talking about Jacob and Rachel, and we're going to be talking about Leah and Leah and Rachel's dad Laban, and we're going to be talking about the whole thing, okay? But we get this from Genesis chapter 29 verse 30, and Genesis chapter 29 through chapter 31. And the point of this is Laban tricks Jacob into marrying Leah and Rachel. Okay, so it's very interesting how it goes through, but you'll be able to see the Christ connection here at the end. And I just want to start out by giving our key passage that we've been learning here. Genesis chapter 28 verse 15. And God says this, "And behold, I am with thee, and will keep thee in all places whither thou goest, and will bring thee again into this land, for I will not leave thee until I have done that which I have spoken to thee of." And so here we find that God is making this promise to Jacob, as Jacob had that dream in the last lesson, and God's promising, hey, listen, I know that you're going in a different place, but I'm going to be with you, and I'm going to bring you back to the land that I promised, and I'm going to keep this covenant with you that I kept with your grandfather Abraham and your father Isaac, and I'll keep this promise because God is faithful throughout all of this. No matter what kind of situations, no matter how crazy it gets, God is still faithful. And so we find out that, again, our question is, does God keep His promises? And yes, God always keeps His promises because He is faithful. And that's a truth that you need to be able to really grasp as we go through these lessons, all right? God is faithful, so He keeps His promises. So what's happened ever since he left that place where he had that dream and he called it Bethel? What happened with Jacob? Well, Jacob heads on over to his uncle's land, and he comes up to this well where a number of shepherds are watering their sheep. And he says, hey, do you all know who Laban is? And he says, yeah. In fact, his daughter is coming up here with all of his sheep with her. And so Jacob looks over and he does the nice thing that men need to do. And he steps up and he actually cares for the sheep, waters them all for Rachel. And as Rachel comes up and he does that, he talks to Rachel about who he is, introduces himself, and she's all excited, so she runs back to her dad, Laban, and lets Laban know that Jacob is there. So then Laban comes out and he says, yeah, come on back, and we'll take care of you. Come on in, we'll take care of you for this time. And so Jacob all of a sudden starts working for Laban. Now, Laban comes up to him and says, okay, you're working for me. What do you want for all of this labor? And so Jacob says, well, how about this? How about we make this agreement that I will get to marry your daughter, Rachel, if you keep me around for 7 years. 7 years, okay? So how much do you think you would get out of 7 years if you worked for that long? Is anybody thinking about this? I mean, how many bags of gummy bears could you get? How many, how many little race cars could you get? I mean, could you get a pretty big remote control car? Or how many Lego sets could you buy with this? I'm just, the imagination's going. 7 years, that's a long time, isn't it? Some of you are just turning 7 or just turned 7. And so you think about this and what Jacob's agreed to, and Laban says, yeah, okay, yeah, I'll give you my daughter to marry, Rachel, if you work for me for 7 years. So 7 years goes by, and it seems like it's just a few days to Jacob. He's just so excited, and all you girls are going, ooh, it's so exciting, just this love story, right? Yeah, is it goo goo gaga, whatever it is. And so Jacob works for 7 years, and wedding day comes around, he's all excited. Well, it turns out that he ends up marrying Leah. You say, who's Leah? Leah is the oldest daughter. And Jacob goes up, and a little ironic, don't you think? Jacob goes up and he says, why did you trick me, Laban? why did you trick me? And I married Leah, and that wasn't what we agreed to. And Laban says, well, in this culture, the oldest daughter has to get married off first. And Jacob said, I worked for Rachel. And he says, well, you know what? If you work for me for another 7 years, if you make this agreement with me, I'll let you marry Rachel next week. So Jacob agrees. He agrees to marry Rachel the next week, and he ends up working for another 7 years. Now the trickster gets tricked. Have you ever thought about that? What comes around, what you send out, what you reap what you sow, that principle. It comes back just like the boomerang. It's going to get you. I mean, think about it. Some of the things that you're doing right now, you can reap the consequences a lot later. So he ends up getting Rachel and Leah, and God understands that, and Jacob really doesn't love Leah because that's not who he worked for. Okay, it's not who he wanted to marry, and so God ends up giving Leah several children. Now Rachel really wants children, so she's praying, and later on throughout this whole entire ordeal, he ends up giving her two. But Jacob and his wives have 12 children. Can you imagine that? 12 sons. And it goes through that it talks about. 12 of them that talks about. I want to give you the names here. And you find Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Issachar, Zebulun, Joseph, and Benjamin. And so here you find Rachel has the last two, Joseph and Benjamin, while there's several others that have the rest of the kids. So there's a lot of mouths to feed here throughout this. But, God's blessing this family with more and more children, and then all of a sudden, they're going to have children, and then their children are going to have children, and all of a sudden you're seeing that the covenant's coming together, even though this is kind of a crazy family. Don't you agree? Kind of a crazy family. But yet God still uses them. God still uses them. You say, what's the Christ connection here? After this is going on, God actually has Jacob go back to the land that he promised Canaan. He says, go back home. But how does Christ work through this? Do you know which line he came from? Not Rachel and her children, but through Leah's son, Judah. That's the line that Christ comes from. So it's interesting how God uses this crazy situation in order to keep his plan moving down the line. Now I wanted to ask you a few questions before we close out here. Okay, just to summarize, see if you're paying attention. Which woman did Jacob want to marry? Yeah, Rachel. Rachel was the name. He ends up marrying Leah, doesn't he? But he ends up getting Rachel later on. Okay, why did Laban trick Jacob? Well, because in their culture, supposedly, the oldest was supposed to get married before the youngest. Okay, how many sons did they have? 12. 12. And God had compassion on Leah when Jacob didn't love her. That's an interesting thought process. What does this show about our God? Oh, that means that those who feel misunderstood and feel unloved and feel lonely, God still loves them. Huh. Have you ever felt that way? God still loves you. God still cares about you. But how does this affect how we treat other people who might feel lonely and misunderstood and feel bullied and things like that? Don't feel loved? We need to love those people. So how can you do that this next week? How can you love those that you don't feel are having a good time? Maybe it's your parents. Maybe it's your siblings. Maybe when they're not feeling so good, love them. Be nice to them. Care for them. These are the things that we need to reflect about our good God. All right? So what's our activity for this day? Well, think about this. All right? Let's do a little Pictionary. How about that? I want you to think about what you would want for working 7 years. So what would you trade for working 7 years? And what you need to do is get your family together, bring them around, and you draw it out on a board. what you want. Draw it out. And the first person that guesses what you have drawn out, they get to go up and draw. So you take turns just like that, acting on what you think you would want for working for 7 years. Well, I hope you enjoy that. I hope you enjoy your day, and I hope to see you again tomorrow. Talk to you later.